This is a chart of every National Simulation Football League team total cumulative offence for every season from Season 1 to Season 21. And this is the Season 9 New Orleans second line, the greatest team in league history. Here's a quick look at where New Orleans fall in every other season. They don't play much in Season 1 due to not existing, which is fair. In Season 2, they are named the Las Vegas Legion, but since they're essentially the same team from when they renamed in Season 5, I'm just going to put them here together. They knock around the bottom of the table for years, not really accomplishing much until Season 8, and then look at them go. They've nearly doubled their production from Season 6, scoring almost 150 points in Season 7, and they do that again in Season 9, ending with a league high of 606 total offensive points. Only one other team has cracked the 600 point barrier, the Season 15 Hawks, who, in their own way, dominated that season. But this is about number 1, and as it happens, 606 is larger than 603. Of course, offense is great, but as we know, defense wins championships. It's all well scoring 50 points per game, but if you allow 60 points each time you hit the field, well, you won't go far. Here's our friends again, the Season 9 New Orleans second line, just sort of existing in their own little bubble. They allowed 242 points that season. No one has come close to putting up such a performance since from Season 5 until now. The S21 Otters had a chance, but they ended up letting in 264 over the course of the season. Also, here's a fun fact, this is the only time the second line have ever had the league best defense. They did it once, but with style. And just in case you were wondering, this is the S8 Sabercats, who allowed 553 points that season. That's a big yikes. So we have one of the best defenses of all time, and the best offense of all time. How do they stack up together? If we look at all the seasons for all the teams, we can see there's only 2 times that a single team has actually had league best offense and league best defense at the same time. Our Season 9 New Orleans second line, and the Season 3 Arizona Outlaws, who scored 503 points to 185 for a difference of 318 points. 185 is an all-time best defense, by the way, and one of only 2 times the team's allowed sub 200 points, the other being the Season 2 Outlaws. New Orleans, however, had bigger delta, scoring 364 points more than they allowed, a league record. We can see the impact this season had for New Orleans if we look at the total cumulative points differential. That is to say, if a team scores less points in the season than they allow, they go down in this chart, more than they go up. Look at that bump. Some teams are consistently strong, the Otters, Hawks and Wraiths being the only 3 teams to have scored more total points than they've allowed through all seasons. Others are just, consistently bad. The Yeti are hanging out down there, having allowed more than 2,000 points more than they've scored. That'll take some time to climb out. In fact, if they match the league best delta of 364 points, it will take them nearly 13 full seasons just to reach where the Otters are right now. But back to the bump. That must be one of the greatest 4-season stretches of all time. In fact, we can check. The Season 1 to 4 Outlaws feel like some sort of cheat code at this point, but second place isn't bad. Season 3 to Season 7 Otters join the Season 8 to Season 11 second line in the aforementioned Outlaws in what I'm calling the 800 Club. Membership is exclusive, and you have to score at least 800 points more than you allow over any 4 seasons, and there's quite a gap between 3rd place and 4th place Hawks, over 125 points behind. The current active highest is the Season 17 to Season 21 Otters, at 522 points delta, but they're still 278 points out of the 800 club. So let's look at just Season 9 specifically. This is every team's points for and points against. over Season 9. And pretty much as expected, second line is leading both stats. They're scoring 38 points per game on average, basically 2 touchdowns more than the league average 25 points. Meanwhile, they're allowing just 15 points per game, 11 less than the league average. For comparison, this is the S9 Sabercats offense, who averaged just 13 points a game, less than New Orleans allowed. I'm not sure if this is a good thing for New Orleans or just a bad thing for the Sabercats, but it seemed like, worth mentioning nonetheless. They're dominant in every part of the game, outscoring every team in every quarter, with the exception of just the Hawks in quarter 4, who do manage to outscore the second line. Now, with all this talent, we expect to see great things when we look at the schedule. First off, pre-season, which, as we know, doesn't count, and in fact isn't included in any of the season figures in any of my charts, but we'll look at it anyway here. 4 matches, 4 wins, and strong wins at that. Right, regular season. It's a reasonable schedule. Let's get going. First 6 games, 6 wins. Good stuff. We're firmly aboard the hype train here. The lowest amount of points they've scored at this period is 23, with every other game being 40 or higher. Just those damn pesky Wraiths ruining things for us here. Week 7 versus the Hawks. The Hawks have not only held the best offense of all time to just 23 points, less than the league average, but they've scored 38 points on one of the greatest defenses of all times. And how the heck did that happen? To be fair to the Hawks, they did manage to make it to the Ultimates that season, so it's fair to say that the Season 9 Hawks were a good team. Probably just a blip. Let's move on. 2 more games, 2 more wins, and then a loss. This time to the Wraiths. Those damned Wraiths, once again making an appearance. And finally, the rest of the season. 4 more wins, including a 51-3 thumping of the Sabercats. So, what happened in those 2 games? We could go into extreme detail about the Hawks game, however, there's very little need once I show you this. We're looking at 8 penalties, 4 sacks, 1 fumble loss, and 2 interceptions, and the final one was in the last play of the game. Hawks played well, but perhaps just as importantly, the second line played like absolute garbage. 38 points was 10 more than they allowed to anyone else all season, and one of only 3 games where they allowed more than 16 points. Essentially, second line just, forgot to turn up and threw away what should have been another W for them. What about the Wraiths? Well, both teams line up for opening kickoff, and what happens? Yep, 16 seconds in and we're down 7 points. Not the greatest start, but what can you do? And the answer to that is apparently nothing. Second line failed to make up the deficit and lose by 6 points. Perhaps if that opening kick hadn't been returned, the historically great defense would have held the Wraiths' opening possession to a punt, and they go on to win 24-23. Who knows? Now let's compare second line to both Hawks and the Wraiths. In fact, let's throw in the Sabercats. Hawks were second in both points for and points against. Not entirely surprising considering what we said about them reaching the Ultimates. There's still quite the gap between first and second place, of course. Wraiths are a bit different. They could only be more average this season if their name was the Colorado Yeti. And although we've given the Sabercats a little bit of shit in this video, let's give them at least one positive. They don't actually have the worst defense this year. They let in an average of 33.9 points per game, while Liberty allowed 34.4, so, that's something. But in terms of New Orleans, what made them so good? Here is the season quarterback rating of every QB for every team that started at least one game through every season, season 1 to season 21. New Orleans languish around the middle of the bottom of the pack for quite some time, before, coinciding with our 800 club bump, we see season 8 and the full arrival of Borkus Maximus III. He was drafted in season 6, but he struggled for 2 seasons, completing almost as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. But by season 9, no longer a rookie, and 3 seasons under his belt, he came out firing. His performance in season 8 would actually be a standout were it not for such a strong performance all round by QBs that year. Through season 9 and season 10, he just kept getting better. Borkus Maximus III would go on to retire with the second most career passing yards and passing TDs in league history, with 2 Ultimate Championships to his name. If we compare all season 9 passes that season, we can see he was good, but Orange County Otters were better. More yards, more completions, more touchdowns, just more really. But what about if we consider how efficient that production was? Let's look at yards per attempt. Okay, 3rd place, behind the Hawks and the Otters. Maybe if we just look at completions? Third place again, behind Otters and Hawks. It's really only when we look at interceptions per attempt that New Orleans lead. And that's not a bad stat to lead, to be fair. How about rushing? Here's the total yards, average per carry, and number of touchdowns for each 1,000 yard rusher that season. New Orleans are leading the charge here thanks to D. Smallwood. And it's worth noting that the Baltimore Hawks actually had more rushing touchdowns on the season with 30, thanks to B. Nuck, who punched in 6 touchdowns in just 32 attempts. In fact, look at this. This right here is the touchdown percentage of every rusher that season with at least 20 attempts. And there's our boy Nuck, just doing his own thing there with nearly 20% touchdown rate. That means 1 in 5 times he was given the ball, he scored a touchdown. That is not so bad. But back to New Orleans and the 27 touchdowns. That right there is the highest single season rushing touchdowns by any player in league history. And it's worth noting that O. Taylor of the Hawks with his 23, well, would have been the record if Smallwood hadn't existed, of course. At least until next season, when it was tied at 23 again by O. Taylor. Smallwood scored 4 touchdowns more than anybody else in that season, and 4 more than anyone else ever has. Combine this with Maximus in at QB and you have a recipe for points. Now, we've looked at offensive production. Now let's not forget the great defensive performance. Let's take a look at some stats for that season. And it looks like New Orleans led the league in 2 of the 5 major defensive stats: tackles for loss and interceptions. The second place in both sacks behind Colorado and passes defended behind the Hawks, but look at tackles. Just the middle of the pack, really. But if you consider a good defense is one that stops an offense and gets itself off the field, that's sort of expected. In fact, with little math, we can work out that 1 in 20 tackles that New Orleans made was a tackle for a loss. Roughly 5% of the time an opponent started to play against them, it was going backwards. That's about 35% more often than the league average. Colorado, who topped the tackle table this season, turned just 3% of tackles into tackles for losses, almost half as often. And takeaways are important too, of course. New Orleans managed 30 of them. 22 interceptions and 8 fumble recoveries, 7 more than second place. Interestingly, second line and the Outlaws are the only two teams that year not to score defensive touchdowns. With the exception of the Sabercats, who got 1, everyone else got at least 2. So, a very good defense. They took the ball away more than anyone else, they tackled for a loss more often than anyone else, and they didn't have to worry about scoring since their offense was busy tearing things up. The offense, well, they had the unmatched greatest running back performance in history and one of the best QBs of all time under centre. Safe to say that the S9 New Orleans second line were absolutely stacked. So, the stats don't lie. This is the greatest team of all time.